Our next keynote speaker is Professor Pare Keiha. Professor Pare Keiha is Auckland University of Technology's Pro Vice-Chancellor for Maori Advancement and also for Learning and Teaching. Previously, he also held the position of Pro Vice-Chancellor for the Commercialisation. He is the current Dean of THETA, my apologies if I have got that wrong, and for the Faculty of Maori and Indigenous Development. He has a strong and extensive background in the governance of a number of public and private companies. His networks and knowledge of research, science and technology is widespread and well recognised. Professor Keiha has participated in a number of Auckland museum reviews, including the Collections, Research and Library Review, and the review of the National History Collections, the review of the Cultural Collections, and the review of the War Memorial Collections. Professor Keiha has served as a member of a number of boards and committees, including the Board of Foundation for Research, Science and Technology. He has also contributed to a number of national significant research groups, including the Performance-Based Research Fund Working Group and Sector Reference Group. In the past, he was a member of the Centre for Research Excellence Fund Committees of the Royal Society of New Zealand. Please join me in welcoming Professor Keiha.
E ngā rangatira o te motu, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. An introduction like that probably is best presented at my funeral because, amongst other things, I belong to an institution, like many of us, in which no good deed should go unpunished. So yes, I'm proud to be the Pro Vice-Chancellor for Learning and Teaching. I'm proud to be the Pro Vice-Chancellor for Maori Advancement, and indeed I'm proud to be the Dean of the Faculty of Maori and Indigenous Development. That just simply gives me licence to be perpetually confused. But before I begin, I want to just remind you of some of the instructions that I was given in preparing my address to you this morning. And I was invited to be entertaining, a very difficult, if not impossible task at this time of the morning. I won't promise to do that, but what I want to do is to remind us of the roles that we all have, and I'm going to use plural collective pronouns this morning deliberately. But before I do that, I'm conscious that many of us have made attempts over the last few days to predict the future. To predict the future. And I want to tell you a story. The joke, of course, is on me. Some of you may be able to see this. It's an old Nokia 6000 series mobile phone. At its time, as many of us know, it was the pinnacle of mobile success. Owning one of these meant that you were part of a special club. It was the bling of its time. About 10 years ago, one of my staff, and you'll see some of his work shortly, bounced into my office and advised me that Apple were about to launch a new gadget, a new iPod. And like most of my staff who frequently come to me, he was asking for more bling. And I looked at the product specifications, and I pulled this particular phone out of this pocket, and I said to him, as sure as God made little apples, no pun intended, these two things would merge. And the rest, as they say, is history. The biggest mistake that I've ever made in my career to date, and I confess this in front of you this morning, is that morning I did not go out and buy Apple shares. Being able to predict the future is one thing. Be able to predict it accurately, if not in a timely fashion, is a completely different challenge. And this morning, I'm wanting to challenge us. I'm wanting to remind us of why we do what we do. And for my part, I borrow quite significantly from the work of Charles Handy, who in his book, The Hungry Spirit, reminded us that we should be properly selfish. Now, what might that mean in the context of this presentation to you this morning? I am unapologetically ambitious for our students. Why? Because I wish to live in a just, civil, well-educated, healthy, cohesive community. And the only way I know how to do that is to do what I do. Now let me tell you how simplistically I see my role, or my roles if you like, as confused as they are. I and we are in the business of hope. Every student I've ever met, every parent I've ever met, stands or sits before me with one thing in their minds: a better life for themselves, if not the communities from which they come, than we currently have today. And I lament, and consequently speak on behalf of our students this morning, because, amongst other things, the decisions that are being made about their futures, if not their costs, are being made by people of my generation, or indeed older. My generation enjoyed, and still do, the luxuries of a fully funded state education. Very few of us were burdened by debt. And yet what do we know? In order to be properly selfish, in order to have a civil, just and well-educated society, we need bright, confident, well-educated young people. And some of you might find it difficult that I, at my age, as advanced as it is, might be standing in front of you advocating for our youth. I do so unapologetically this morning. But more importantly, I'm conscious that I am amongst a significant team, and again I use that word deliberately, of individuals committed to supporting our students. But the ecosystem in which we operate isn't perhaps as benevolent as our students might think. Now, what I'd like to do this morning is to give you a wee glimpse of some of those things which I have the privilege to champion. If it is possible this morning, could you simply see me as a very old, aging rock band groupie? Because yes, I hold these titles, but this morning I have one role. My role is to simply be the voice of, and consequently the champion for, the work that we all do, if not the work that my teams, our teams do at the Auckland University of Technology. And importantly, led by one of the tiniest faculties in my university, if not probably one of the tiniest faculties in the world. We have less than 250 equivalent full-time students. So, unapologetically, we're digital natives. Yes, I know that this phrase has been used in a different context, but we are digitally native. We're Maori, we're proud, we're confident, we're technologically capable, but more importantly, what we do is delivered from a student-centric perspective. And for those of you who had the time to read my abstract, amongst other things, you'll understand why we are not lukewarm. This, of course, is one of the most important gravestones in respect of our attempts to predict history. And this quotation is one that I'm reminded of frequently as a champion, if not a leader. Amongst other things, I'm often referred to as the university's chief technology terrorist. Because, yes, with due respect, I apologise in advance, I terrorise many of our staff. I do so unapologetically, simply because I look at the world through the eyes of our students. Imagine if we reformed everything that we did from their perspective. Imagine, just imagine for a moment, that we all adopted common commitment to reduce the opportunity costs of their participation in tertiary education. And what could we do for them? The first thing that I would do would be to ban the textbook. In this day and age, if there was anything so morally repugnant and indefensible as the textbook, I would be very, very difficult to find. Who paid for the knowledge and indeed the time for those textbooks to be created? We have roughly 20,000 students at our institution, probably still paying about $1,000 a year in textbook costs. That's $20 million worth of textbooks we expect our students to purchase. Imagine, however, if we made a simple commitment to give our students everything that they required to be successful. And more importantly, that commitment could be found on this. And interesting enough, sitting in the back of this auditorium this morning, I noted that almost without exception, we were all glued to a screen or two. We were all glued to a screen or two. And what could we do in respect of making a commitment to deliver everything for our students to be successful on mobile devices? What are the sorts of things that we could do and consequently transform the ecosystem in which we all operate? Take our institutions and the way we use timetables. On average, certainly in New Zealand, we teach from some of the most expensive real estate in this country for only 26 weeks a year. Try this when you all go home. If not tonight, then certainly later in the week. Get a piece of chalk. Some of you might even very well remember what chalk is. Draw a line down half of your house or your apartment. And I dare you to live in half of it for a week. You probably wouldn't last until the morning, particularly if the shower or the coffee machine was on the other side. But this is what we do. We only teach from some of the most expensive real estate in this country, roughly for 26 weeks a year. And what could we do to transform the balance sheets of our institutions by simply giving our students all the material to be successful? Now, yes, I have been told that you cannot do this because students will not come to lectures. My experience as an undergraduate student, much to my father's irritation, is represented in 2 sugar bags. Yes, some of you might even remember what a sugar bag is, of lecture notes sitting in his garage, and the mechanical transfer of that material from the blackboard. Yes, we all predicted the downfall of modern civilization when the blackboard was removed from classrooms. The mechanical transfer of that information then and now is highly inefficient and costly to us all. So, what did Mr. Machiavelli advise us? There is nothing more difficult than to bring about a new order of things. And don't we know it? Don't we know it? Why? Because there are those who have too much invested in the past. Try talking to your CFOs about acquiring CapEx in order to build digital resources, in order to make our teaching much more efficient, if not much more effective. And he, inevitably he, will say, no, we can't do it. I can tell you that the international finance regulations do allow us to capitalise the development of our curriculum. We can do it. And what would we do if we simply made that commitment to providing all of our resources to our students, more importantly, at no cost? So not only do we have those who profit by the old order, but we also have those who are lukewarm. Wonderful phrase, lukewarm. Try enjoying a lukewarm cup of tea or a lukewarm bath, both hideous experiences. And we wouldn't accept it from anybody. So earlier, I said that none of us are lukewarm. I'm also assuming that nobody in this room is lukewarm. But what might I do for you to give you courage? I can show you. I can show you some of the small innovations that my teams have been responsible for. And this is from a student-centric perspective. And so I will show you, particularly coming out of small Indigenous faculties such as the Faculty of Maori Development, some early work of some of our students who've used their own cultural capital to build and to tell stories for and on behalf of their communities. I will show you some new curriculum. I'm able to show you not just the future, but also the present. This is a Christmas present delivered to me by some of my staff earlier this year. One of our new entrepreneurs came to see me in November and asked if we could assist him in developing an app for the delivery of his entire coursework. 10 weeks later, this is what we produced. But most importantly, on the corner of this box are 2 QR codes. I asked my staff for a very, very simple Christmas present this year. An answer to the question, can we deliver our curriculum by using QR codes? Yes, we have done it. Yes, we have done it. And more importantly, I will provide you evidence, very simple evidence, for the fact that it is possible to teach old dogs new tricks. And Mike Hutchison, some of you may know him, won't mind you telling me this. It is possible to teach dogs new tricks, but more importantly, the service delivery model which my teams have developed are to take perhaps those who may be lukewarm, to hold their hands very firmly and to give them courage to be what I refer to as heroic teachers. Heroic teachers, like many of us, have no fear. Heroic teachers understand their discipline, but more importantly, they have at the centre of their consciousness our students. So if you can indulge me for a bit, I thought for a moment on how I might deliver this, so let's hope that the technology will work. So this is some early work that we did in the faculty, and this young woman will appear later in this presentation. This is effectively a digital version of what we in my culture refer to as our Pare, that which anchors us to our land, to our communities, and to the culture from which we come. Very, very small rural community, a very, very poor rural community. And this is some work which she has done in her second year. This is work which my staff have championed in order to allow her to appropriate the cultural capital which she is familiar with, and importantly, to give it back. This is an example of some work that another student of ours has done with the Auckland Museum, in which we have given her the opportunity to explore, through a simple artefact, her being, her culture, and indeed the treasures from the community from which we've come, using digital technology not only to enhance her own skills of inquiry, reasoning, and otherwise, but to give back to her communities. That was a particular example of the curriculum we've developed. And just quickly, this is the new personal training program at AET, where the entire curriculum is now being delivered via an app. No more publication costs, directly delivered into the hands of the students in this program. And more importantly, no more textbooks. And of course, we could only have done this through the dedication of the academic staff that we serve and who consequently serve our students. This is the first example of a postgraduate paper in the School of Art and Design. It is the first. It will not be the last. The entire program by the end of this year will be delivered via a series of apps. And of course, what we do is we link the content provided in these apps, the content provided by the library, by student services, and by others. And again, this is part of our commitment to reduce not only the opportunity costs of participation in tertiary education by our students, but more importantly, to ensure that that material is up to date, consistent, and more importantly, supported by appropriate digital resources. This is the example which I've just shown you. Created a few technical problems. Here's Mike. It is possible to teach an old dog new tricks. He was able to acquire some of the best entrepreneurial minds in this country. And we simply videoed them over a period of 10 weeks, cut that material into bite-sized chunks, and now are able to provide this material not only to our students, but we will this year effectively gamify this material and make it freely available to the rest of the country at no cost as part of our commitment to transforming the entrepreneurial spirit of our young people, particularly at secondary schools. And this is an extraordinary example of how universities can indeed partner with, in this particular instance, well-respected, highly experienced entrepreneurs in this field. Not one single individual that allowed themselves to be filmed in support of this work expected any fee for service. They simply did it out of the goodness of our hearts. This is a particular example that we're working on at the moment for the business school in delivering to all of their students in a timely manner some of the course material and advice material that the students need. And of course, once we've developed for one program, it's relatively simple, relatively in inverted commas, to roll it out across the university. This is a particular program that we've developed specifically to recruit in the south of this city young New Zealanders who require a second chance. So we, for them, developed an opportunity to develop an app. This app is very important. I'm just going to stop it here because I just want to point out some of the advantages. This is one of the first apps that was developed by a group of postgraduate students. They came to us with one very simple plea. The world is going to hell in a handbasket. Not quite their words, but it'll do for this morning. The world is going to hell in a handbasket simply because we do not understand the relationship between the carbon cycle and the water cycle. Go figure. 12 months later, 4 of our students delivered this app to the rest of the world at no cost. And at one point, there were 10,000 downloads from a school district in the US, using this to better teach their students on the relationship between the carbon cycle and the water cycle. What I want to make this point is, one, it was developed by our students. Two, the senior PhD student, within 6 months of launching this app, was invited to her first international conference in Gothenburg. 12 months later, the app was effectively shortlisted in a worldwide competition at Wharton. Most of us who've gone through the traditional academic routes of promotion and publication would envy a contracted value chain which might look like that. But, you know, one of the most breathtaking, I use that word deliberately, experiences I've ever had is these 4 kids, none of them who knew about each other's discipline. One was a applied ecologist, one was a coder, one was an animator, and one was a designer, knew nothing about each other's discipline. I have never seen a group, and I'm going to use this word deliberately, of scholars work so efficiently and collaboratively in such a short period of time. 1 year it took them. And I therefore invite us to think not just as our students as recipients of the knowledge that we create, but more importantly, co-creators in order to improve the reputation of our institutions. We have ambitions to translate this into German and eventually into Te Reo Mare, the first language of New Zealand. And just as I conclude, the next couple of videos that I'll show you is based upon my own ambition to transform the way we support much of what we do. This is a particular app which we developed for the Venice Architecture Biennale last year in order to support the work of our students. We created 2 apps, not just this one, but a second one, which you'll see shortly, of waiata, or indeed Maori songs, because one of the challenges which I put to my staff was to ensure that the New Zealand Pavilion and the New Zealand presence in Venice would never be forgotten. And we did that not only by supporting the exhibition itself using digital technology, but more importantly, by providing some cultural resources for all of those in attendance, and this is the example. The next example that we will show you is effectively another ambitious attempt to look at improving the revenues of our institutions. The app which I'll show you briefly, this one here, is one I've done for the Motutapu Restoration Trust. Motutapu is an island located in the centre of our harbour. It is an attempt to answer the following question: what would we have to do to sell a $5 app to half of the visitors to that island? There are 100,000 visitors. Divide by half, multiply by 5. That's $250,000 a year in revenues that we're wanting to do. And so I'm working with the Māori community at Takaparawhau at Bastion Point to provide a similar response to their question: what would we have to do to sell a $2 app to the 1.1 million visitors that that community has? And so, built out of the principles of good research, good inquiry, but more importantly, good communications, we've started to deliberately provide these examples in order for many of us, including our funders, to be able to say, are institutions such as universities in the business of creating knowledge, or importantly, reforming that knowledge to a point whereby communities can become self-sustaining in the way they use that knowledge for their own economic development. And so this app is just a small example. I'm very happy to show you, it hasn't been released yet, of what we can do with our students, because each one of these apps, I'm proud to tell you, has the touch, has the hand of a student, but more importantly, a Māori student. And for many of you, you might think, well, that's a very small and very inconsequential feature of the work that we're doing. But it is so important in my role as the Pro Vice Chancellor of my advancement to do one thing, and to be reminded constantly The business that we're all in is a business of hope, to provide a better life for our students and the communities from which they come forever. And so I want to thank you for the opportunity to address you this morning. I want to encourage you to be courageous and to borrow from a little phrase that we use, particularly in my groups: do not ask permission, just beg forgiveness. And if all of that fails, hopefully I'll be able to provide you with at least one example where you could go back to either your CFO or your Vice-Chancellor and say, well, if they can do it at the Auckland University of Technology in New Zealand, so can we. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for attendance, thank you for your courage, and more importantly, thank you for your commitment to our mission to deliver hope for a better life tomorrow for our students and their communities than we currently have today. Thank you very much.